Section 16 of The Talking Horse and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Talking Horse and Other Stories by F. Anstey. Section 16. Marjory, Part 2. I'm afraid I must own that this desire of Marjory's was not realized. I do not know that I tried to be, and I certainly was not, a popular boy. The other boys, I now know, were by no means bad specimens of the English schoolboy, as will be evident when I state that, for a time, my deep mourning was held by them to give me a claim to their forbearance. But I had an unfortunate tendency to sudden floods of tears, apparently for no cause whatever, really from some secret spring of association, which, as I remember, was touched when I first found myself learning Latin from the same primer over which my mother and I had puzzled together. And these outbursts at first aroused my companions' contempt, and finally their open ridicule. I could not conceal my shrinking dislike to their society, which was not calculated to make them more favourably disposed towards me, while my tastes, my expressions, my ways of looking at things, were all at total variance with their own standards. The general disapproval might well have shown itself in a harsher manner than that of merely ignoring my existence, and it says much for the tone of the school that it did not. Unfortunately, I felt their indifference almost as keenly as I had dreaded their notice. For my masters I met with more favour, for I had been thoroughly well grounded, and found, besides, a temporary distraction in my schoolwork. But this was hardly likely to render me more beloved by my fellows, and so it came to pass that every day saw my isolation more complete. Something, however, made me anxious to hide this from Marjory's eyes, and whenever she happened to be looking on at us in the school grounds or the playing fields, I made dismal attempts to appear on terms of equality with the rest, and would hang about a group with as much pretence of belonging to it as I thought at all prudent. If she had had more opportunities of questioning me, she would have found me out, long before. As it was, the only occasion on which we were near one another was at the weekly drawing lesson, when, although she drew less and talked more than the Professor quite approved of, she was obliged to restrict herself to a conversation which did not admit of confidences. But this negative neutral-tinted misery was not to last. I was harmless enough, but then to some natures nothing is so offensive as inoffensiveness. My isolation was certain to raise me up an enemy in time, and he came in the person of one Clarence Ormsby. He was a sturdy, good-looking fellow, about 2 years older than myself, good at games, and, though not brilliant in other respects, rather idle than dull. He was popular in the school, and I believe his general disposition was by no means bad. But there must have been some hidden flaw in his nature which might never have disclosed itself for any other but me. For me he had displayed, almost from the first, one of those special antipathies that want but little excuse to ripen into hatred. My personal appearance (I had the misfortune to be a decidedly plain boy) happened to be particularly displeasing to him, and, as he had an unsparing tongue, he used it to cover me with ridicule, until gradually, finding that I did not retaliate, he indulged in acts of petty oppression which, though not strictly bullying, were even more harassing and humiliating. I suspect now that if I had made ever so slight a stand at the outset, I should have escaped further molestation, but I was not pugnacious by nature, and never made the experiment. Partly, probably, from a theory on which I had been reared, that all violence was vulgar, but chiefly from a tendency, unnatural in one of my age and sex, to find a sentimental satisfaction in a certain degree of unhappiness. so that I can neither pity myself nor expect pity from others for woes which were so essentially my own creation, though they resulted, alas, in misery that was real enough. It was inevitable that quick-sighted Marjory should discover the subjection into which I had fallen, and her final enlightenment was brought about in this manner. Ormsby and I were together alone, shortly before morning school, and he came towards me with an exercise of mine from which he had just been copying his own, for we were in the same classes, despite the difference in our ages, and he was in the habit of profiting thus by my industry. "Thanks, Cameron," he said, with a sweetness which I distrusted, for he was not as a rule so lavish in his gratitude. "I've copied out that exercise of yours, but it's written so beastly bad that you'd better do it over again." With which he deliberately tore the page he had been copying from to scraps, which he threw in my face, and strolled out down to the playground. I was preparing submissively to do the exercise over again as well as I could in the short time that was left, when I was startled by a low cry of indignation, and looking round saw Marjory standing in the doorway, and knew by her face that she had seen all. "Has Ormsby done that to you before?" she inquired. "Once or twice he has," said I. "And you let him?" she cried. "Oh, Cameron!" "What can I do?" I said. "I know what I would do," she replied. "I would slap his face, or pinch him. I wouldn't put up with it." "Boys don't slap one another, or pinch," I said, not displeased to find a weak place in her knowledge of us. "Well, they do something," she said. "A real boy would. But I don't think you are a real boy, Cameron. I'll show you what to do. Where's the exercise that pig copied? Ah, I see it. And now, look!" Here she tore his page as he had torn mine. "Now for an envelope." And from the doctor's own desk she took an envelope, in which she placed the fragments, and wrote on the outside in her round childish hand, "With Marjory's compliments for being a bully." "He won't do that again," she said gleefully. "He'll do worse," I said in dismay. "I shall have to pay for it, Marjory. Why didn't you leave things alone?" "I didn't complain, you know I didn't." She turned upon me, as well she might, in supreme disdain. "Oh, what a coward you are! I wouldn't believe all Cartwright told me about you when I asked, but I see it's all true. Why don't you stick up for yourself?" I muttered something or other. "But you ought to. You'll never get on unless," said Marjory very decidedly. "Now promise me you will, next time." I sat there silent. I was disgusted with myself, and meanly angry with her for having rendered me so. "Then listen," she said impressively. "I promised I would look after you, and I did mean to, but it's no use if you won't help yourself. So unless you say you won't go on being a coward any more, I shall have to leave you to your own way, and not take the least interest in you ever again." "Then you may," I said stolidly. "I don't care." I wondered, even while I spoke the words, what could be impelling me to treat spirited, warm-hearted Marjory like that, and I hate myself still at the recollection. "Good-bye, then," she said very quietly. "I'm sorry, Cameron," and she went out without another word. When Ormsby came in, I watched him apprehensively as he read the envelope upon his desk and saw its contents. He said nothing, however, though he shot a malignant glance in my direction. But the lesson was not lost upon him, for from that time he avoided an open ill-treatment of me, and even went so far as to assume a friendliness which might have reassured me had I not instinctively felt that it merely masked the old dislike. I was constantly the victim of mishaps, in the shape of missing and defaced books, ink mysteriously spilt or strangely adulterated, and though I could never trace them to any definite hand, they seemed too systematic to be quite accidental. Still I made no sign, and hoped thus to disarm my persecutor, if persecutor there were. As for my companions, I knew that in no case would they take the trouble to interfere in my behalf. They had held aloof from the first, the general opinion, which I now perceived was not unjust, being that I deserved all I got. And my estrangement from Marjory grew wider and wider. She never spoke to me now, when we sat near one another at the drawing-class. If she looked at me, it was by stealth, and with a glance that I thought sometimes was contemptuously pitiful, and sometimes felt fancied betrayed a willingness to return to the old comradeship. But I nursed my stupid sullen pride, though my heart ached with it at times, for I had now come to love Marjory devotedly, with a love that, though I was a boy and she was a child, was as genuine as I am ever likely to feel again. The chance of seeing her now and then, of hearing her speak, though it was not to me, gave me the one interest in my life which, but for her, I could hardly have borne. But this love of mine was a very far-off and disinterested worship after all. I could not imagine myself ever speaking of it to her, or picture her as accepting it. Marjory was too thorough a child to be vulgarized in that way, even in thought. The others were healthy, matter-of-fact youths, to whom Marjory was an ordinary girl, and who certainly did not indulge in any strained sentiment respecting her. It was left to me to idealize her, but of that at least I cannot feel ashamed, or believe that it did me anything but good. And the days went on, until it wanted but a fortnight to Christmas, and most of us were thinking of the coming holidays, and preparing with not unpleasant excitement for the examinations, which were all that barred the way to them now. I was to spend my Christmas with my uncle and cousins, who would by that time be able to receive me. But I felt no very pleasurable anticipations, for my cousins were all boys, and from boys I thought I knew what to expect. One afternoon Ormsby came to me with the request that I would execute a trifling commission for him in the adjoining village. He himself, he said, was confined to bounds, but he had a shilling he wanted to lay out at a small fancy shop we were allowed to patronize, and he considered me the best person to be entrusted with that coin. I was simply to spend the money on anything I thought best, for he had entire confidence, he gave me to understand, in my taste and judgment. I think I suspected a design of some sort, but I did not dare to refuse, and then his manner to some extent disarmed me. I took the shilling, therefore, with which I bought some article, I forget what, and got back to school at dusk. The boys had all gone down to tea, except Ormsby, who was waiting for me up in the empty schoolroom. "Well?" he said, and I displayed my purchase, only to find that I had fallen into a trap. When I think how easily I was the dupe of that not too subtle artifice, which was only half malicious, I could smile, if I did not know how it ended. "How much was that?" he asked contemptuously. "Twopence halfpenny? Well, if you choose to give a shilling for it, I'm not going to pay, that's all, so give me back my shilling." Now as my weekly allowance consisted of threepence, which was confiscated for some time in advance, as I think he knew, to provide fines for my mysteriously stained dictionaries, this was out of the question, as I represented. "Then go back to the shop and change it," said he. "I won't have that thing." "Tell me what you would like instead, and I will," I stipulated, not unreasonably. He laughed. His little scheme was working so admirably. "That's not the bargain," he said. "You're bound to get me something I like. I'm not obliged to tell you what it is." But even I was driven to protest against such flagrant unfairness. "I didn't know you meant that," I said, "or I'm sure I shouldn't have gone. I went to oblige you, Ormsby." "No, you didn't," he said. "You went because I told you, and you'll do it again." "Not unless you tell me what I'm to get," he said. "I tell you what I believe," he said. "You never spent the whole shilling at all on that. You bought something for yourself with the rest, you young swindler." No wonder you won't go back to the shop." This was, of course, a mere taunt flung out by his inventive fancy, but as he persisted in it, and threatened exposure and a variety of consequences, I became alarmed, for I had little doubt that, innocent as I was, I could be made very uncomfortable by accusations which would find willing hearers. He stood there, enjoying my perplexity, and idly twisting a piece of string round and round his fingers. At length he said, "Well, I don't want to be hard on you. You may go and change this for me even now, if you like. I'll give you 3 minutes to think it over, and you can come down into the playground when I sing out, and tell me what you mean to do. And you had better be sharp in coming too, or it will be the worse for you." He took his cap, and presently I heard him going down the steps to the playground. I would have given worlds to go and join the rest at tea, but I did not dare, and remained in the schoolroom, which was dim just then, for the gas was lowered, and while I stood there by the fireplace, trembling in the cold air which stole in through the door Ormsby had left open, Marjory came in by the other one, and was going straight to her father's desk when she saw me. Her first impulse seemed to be to take no notice, but something in my face or attitude made her alter her mind, and come straight to me, holding out her hand. "Cameron," she said, "shall we be friends again?" "Yes, Marjory," I said. I could not have said any more just then. "You look so miserable. I couldn't bear it any longer," she said, "so I had to make it up. You know I was only pretending crossness, Cameron, all the time, because I really thought it was best. But it doesn't seem to have done you much good, and I did promise to take care of you. What is it, Ormsby again?" "Yes," I said, and told her the story of the commission. "Oh, you stupid boy!" she cried. "Couldn't you see he only wanted to pick a quarrel? And if you change it now, he'll make you change it again, and the next time, and the next after that. I know he will." Here Ormsby's voice shouted from below. "Now then, you Cameron, time's up." "What is he doing down there?" asked Marjory, and her indignation rose higher when she heard. "Now, Cameron, be brave. Go down and tell him once for all he may just keep what he has and be thankful. Whatever it is, it's good enough for him, I'm sure." But I still hung back. "It's no use, Marjory. He'll tell everyone I cheated him. He says he will." "That he shall not," she cried. "I won't have it. I'll go myself and tell him what I think of him, and make him stop treating you like this." Some faint glimmer of manliness made me ashamed to allow her thus to fight my battles. "No, Marjory, not you," I said. "I will go. I'll say what you want me to say." But it was too late. I saw her for just a second at the door, my impetuous, generous little Marjory, as she flung back her pretty hair in a certain spirited way she had, and nodded to me encouragingly. And then, I can hardly think of it calmly even now, there came a sharp scream, and the sound of a fall, and, after that, silence. Sick with fear, I rushed to the head of the steps and looked down into the brown gloom. "Keep where you are for a minute," I heard Ormsby cry out. "It's all right. She's not hurt. Now you can come down." I was down in another instant, at the foot of the stairs, where, in a patch of faint light that fell from the door above, lay Marjory, with Ormsby bending over her insensible form. "She's dead!" I cried in my terror, as I saw her white face. "I tell you she's all right," said he impatiently. "There's nothing to make a fuss about. She slipped coming down and cut her forehead, that's all." "Marjory, speak to me." "Don't look like that. Tell me you're not much hurt," I implored her, but she only moaned a little, and her eyes remained fast shut. "It's no use worrying her now, you know," said Ormsby more gently. "Just help me to get her round to the kitchen door and tell somebody." We carried her there between us, and, amidst a scene of terrible confusion and distress, Marjory, still insensible, was carried into the library, and a man sent off in hot haste for the surgeon. A little later Ormsby and I were sent for to the study, when Mr. Daring, whose face was white and drawn as I had ever seen it before, questioned us closely as to our knowledge of the accident. Ormsby could only say that he was out in the playground when he saw somebody descending the steps and heard a fall, after which he ran up and found Marjory. "I sent her into the schoolroom to bring my paper knife," said the doctor. "If I had but gone myself. But why should she have gone outside on a frosty night like this?" "Oh, Dr. Daring," I broke out, I'm afraid she went for me." I saw Ormsby's face as I spoke, and there was a look upon it which made me pity him. "And you sent my poor child out on your errand, Cameron. Could you not have done it yourself?" "I wish I had," I exclaimed. "Oh, I wish I had. I tried to stop her, and then it was too late. Please tell me, sir, is she badly hurt?" "How can I tell?" he said harshly. "There, I can't speak of this just yet. Go, both of you." There was little work done at evening preparation that night. The whole school was buzzing with curiosity and speculation, as we heard doors opening and shutting around, and the wheels of the doctor's gig as it rolled up the chestnut avenue. I sat with my hands shielding my eyes and ears, engaged to all appearance with the books before me, while my restless thoughts were employed in making earnest resolutions for the future. At last I saw my cowardice in its true light, and I felt impatient to tell Marjory that I did so, to prove to her that I had really reformed. But when would an opportunity come? I might not see her again for days, perhaps not at all till after the holidays. But I would not let myself dwell upon such a contingency as that, and, to banish it, tried to picture what Marjory would say and how she would look, when I was allowed to see her again. After evening prayers, read by one of the assistant masters, for the doctor did not appear again, we were enjoined to go up to our bedrooms with as little noise as possible, and we had been in bed some time before Sutcliffe, the old butler, came up as usual to put out the lights. On this occasion he was assailed by a fire of eager whispers from every door. "Sutcliffe, hi! Old Sutty, how is she?" But he did not seem to hear, until a cry louder than the rest brought him to our door. "For God's sake, gentlemen, don't," he said in a hoarse whisper as he turned out the light. "They'll hear you downstairs." "But how is she? Do you know? Better?" "Ay," he said, "she's better. She'll be over her troubles soon, will Miss Marjory." A low murmur of delight ran round the room, which the butler tried to check in vain. "Don't," he said again. Wait till morning. Go to sleep quiet now, and I'll come up first thing and tell you." He had no sooner turned his back than the general relief broke out irrepressibly, Ormsby being especially demonstrative. "Didn't I tell you fellows so?" he said triumphantly. "As if it was likely a plucky girl like Marjory would mind a little cut like that. She'll be all right in the morning, you'd see." But this confidence jarred upon me, who could not pretend to share it, until I was unable to restrain the torturing anxiety I felt. "You're wrong, all of you," I cried. "I'm sure she's not better. Didn't you hear how Sutcliffe said it? She's worse. She may even be dying." I met with the usual treatment of a prophet of evil. "You young muff," I was told on all sides, "who asked your opinion? Who are you, to know better than any one else?" Ormsby attacked me hotly for trying to excite a groundless alarm, and I was recommended to hold my tongue and go to sleep. I said no more, but I could not sleep. The others dropped off one by one, Ormsby being the last, but I lay awake, listening and thinking, until the dread and suspense grew past bearing. I must know the truth. I would go down and find the doctor, and beg him to tell me. He might be angry and punish me, but that would be nothing in comparison with the relief of knowing my fear was unfounded. Stealthily I slipped out of bed, stole through the dim room of the door, and down the old staircase, which creaked under my bare feet. The dog in the yard howled as I passed the big window, through which the stars were sparkling frostily in the keen blue sky. Outside the room in which Marjory lay I listened, but could hear nothing. At least she was sleeping then, and, relieved already, I went on down the hall. The big clock on the table there was ticking solemnly, like a slow footfall. The lamp was alight, so the doctor must be still up. With a heart that beat loudly, I went to his study door and lifted my hand to knock, when from within rose a sound at which the current of my blood stopped and ran backwards, the terrible, heart-broken grief of a grown man. Boy as I was, I felt that an agony like that was sacred. Besides, I knew the worst then. I dragged myself upstairs again, cold to the bones, with a brain that was frozen too. My one desire was to reach my bed, cover my face, and let the tears flow, though when I did regain it, no tears and no thoughts came. I lay there and shivered for some time, with a stony, stunned sensation, and then I slept, as if Marjory were well. The next morning the bell under the cupola did not clang, and Sutcliffe came up with the direction that we were to go down very quietly, and not to draw up the window blinds, and then we all knew what had happened during the night. There was a very genuine grief, though no one knew Marjory as I had known her. The more emotional wept, the older ones indulged in semi-pious conventional comments, oddly foreign to their usual tone. All, even the most thoughtless, felt the same hush and awe overtake them. I could not cry. I felt nothing, except a dull rage at my own insensibility. Marjory was dead, and I had no tears. Morning school was a mere pretence that day. We dreaded, for almost the first time, to see the doctor's face. But he did not show himself, and the arrangements necessary for the breaking up of the school were made by the matron. Some, including Ormsby and myself, could not be taken in for some days, during which we had to remain at the school, days of shadow and monotony, with occasional ghastly outbreaks of the high spirits which nothing could repress, even in that house of mourning. But the time passed at last, until it was the evening of the day on which Marjory had been left to her last sleep. The poor father and mother had been unable to stay in the house now that it no longer covered even what had been their child, and the only two, beside the matron and a couple of servants who still remained there, were Ormsby and I, who were both to leave on the following morning. I would rather have been alone just then with any one but Ormsby, though he had never since that fateful night taken the slightest notice of me. He looked worn and haggard to a degree that made me sure he must have cared more for Marjory than I could have imagined, and yet he would break at times into a feverish gaiety which surprised and repelled me. He was in one of these latter moods that evening as we sat, as far apart as possible, in the empty firelit schoolroom. "Now, Cameron," as he came up to me and struck me boisterously on the shoulder, "wake up, man. I've been in the blues long enough. We can't go on moping always. On the night before the holidays, too. Do something to make yourself sociable. Talk, can't you?" "No, I can't," I said, and, breaking from him, went to one of the windows and looked vacantly out into blackness, which reflected the long room with its dingy greenish maps, and the desks and forms glistening in the fire-beams. The ice-bound state in which I had been so long was slowly passing away, now that scene by the little grave that raw, cheerless morning had brought home remorselessly the truth that Marjory was indeed gone, lost to me for ever. I could see now what she had been to me, how she had made my great loneliness endurable, how, with her innocent, fearless nature, she had tried to rouse me from spiritless and unmanly dejection, and I could never hope to please her now by proving that I had learnt the lesson. She had gone from me to some world infinitely removed, in which I was forgotten, and my pitiful trials and struggles could be nothing to her any more. I was once more alone, and this second bereavement revived in all its crushing desolation the bitter loss which it so closely followed. So, as I stood there at the window, my unnatural calm could hold out no longer. The long frozen tears thawed, and I could weep for the first time since Marjory died. But I was not allowed to sorrow undisturbed. I felt a rough grasp on my arm, as Ormsby asked me angrily, "What's the matter now?" "Oh, Marjory, come to me," I could only cry. "I can't bear it. I can't. "Stop that, do you hear?" he said savagely. "I won't have it. Who are you to cry about her when, but for you—" He got no farther. The bitter truth in such a taunt, coming from him, stung me to ungovernable rage. I turned and struck him full in the mouth, which I cut open with my clenched hand. His eyes became all pupil. "You shall pay me for that," he said through his teeth, and forcing me against a desk, he caught up a large T-square which lay near. He was far the stronger, and I felt myself powerless in his grasp. Passion and pain had made him beside himself for the moment, and he did not know how formidable a weapon the heavy-weighted instrument might become in his hand. I shut my eyes. I think I rather hoped he would kill me, and then perhaps I might go where Marjory was. I did not cry for help, and it would have been useless if I had done so, for the schoolroom was a long way from the kitchen and offices of that rambling old house. But before the expected blow was dealt, I felt his grasp relax, and heard the instrument fall with a sudden clatter on the floor. "Look," he whispered, in a voice I did not recognise. "Look there." And when I opened my eyes, I saw Marjory standing between us. She looked just as I had always seen her. I suppose that even the afterlife could not make Marjory look purer or more lovely than she was on earth. My first feeling was a wild conviction that it had all been some strange mistake, that Marjory was not dead. "Marjory, Marjory!" I cried in my joy. "Is it really you? You have come back after all, and it is not true!" She looked at us both without speaking for a moment. Her dear brown eyes had lost their old childish sparkle, and were calm and serious, as if with a deeper knowledge. Ormsby had cowered back to the opposite wall, covering his face. "Go away!" he gasped. "Cameron, you ask her to go. She liked you. I never meant it. Tell her I never meant to do it." I could not understand such terror at the sight of Marjory, even if she had been what he thought her. But there was a reason in his case. "You were going to hurt Cameron," said Marjory at length, and her voice sounded sad and grave and far away. "I don't care, Marjory," I cried. "Not now you are here." She motioned me back. "You must not come nearer," she said. "I cannot stay long, and I must speak to Ormsby. Ormsby, have you told anyone?" "No," he said, shaking all over. "It could do no good. I thought I needn't." "Tell him," said Marjory. "Must I? Oh, no, no," he groaned. "Don't make me do that." "You must," she answered, and he turned to me with a sullen fear. "It was like this," he began. "That night when I was waiting for you down there, I had some string, and it struck me, all in a moment, that it would be fun to trip you up. I didn't mean to hurt you, only frighten you. I fastened the string across a little way from the bottom, and then—" he had to moisten his lips before he could go on. "Then she came down, and I tried to catch her, and couldn't. No, I couldn't." "Is that all?" asked Marjory, as he stopped short. "I cut the string and hid it before you came. Now you know, and you may tell if you like." "Cameron, you will never tell, will you, as long as he lives?" said Marjory. "You must promise." I was horrified by what I had heard, but her eyes were upon me, and I promised. And Ormsby promised me to be kinder to him after this. He could not speak, but he made a sign of assent. "And now," said Marjory, "shake hands with him and forgive him." But I revolted. "No, Marjory, I can't. Not now, when I know this." "Cameron, dear," she said, "you won't let me go away sorry, will you? And I must go so soon. For my sake, when I wish it so." I went to Ormsby and took his cold, passive hand. "I do forgive him, Marjory," I said. She smiled brightly at us both. "And you won't forget, either of you," she said. "And, Douglas, you will be brave and take your own part now. Good bye, good bye." I tried to reach her. "Don't leave me. Take me with you, Marjory. Dear, dear Marjory, don't go." But there was only firelit space where she had stood, though the sound of her pleading, pathetic voice was still in the air. Ormsby remained for a few minutes leaning against a desk, with his face buried in his arms, and I heard him struggling with his sobs. At last he rose and left the room without a word, but I stayed where I had last seen Marjory till the fire died down, and the hour was late, for I was glad to be alone with the new and solemn joy that had come to me. For she had not forgotten me where she was. I had been allowed to see her once more, and it might even be that I should see her again, and I resolved then that when she came she should find me more worthy of her. From that night my characters seemed to enter upon a new phase, and when I returned to school it was to begin my second term under better auspices. My cousins had welcomed me cordially among them, and as I mastered the lesson of give and take, of respecting oneself in respecting others, which I needed to learn, my early difficulties vanished with the weakness that had produced them. By Ormsby I was never again molested. In word and deed he was true to the promise exacted from him during that last strange scene. At first he avoided me as being too painfully connected with the past, but by degrees, as he recognised that his secret was safe in my keeping, we grew to understand one another better, although it would be too much to say that we ever became intimate. After he went to Sandhurst I lost sight of him, and only a few months since, the news of his death in the Soudan, where he fell gallantly, made me sorrowfully aware that we should never meet again. I had a lingering fancy that Marjory might appear to me once more, but I have long since given up all hope of that in this life. For what may come after I am content to wait. But the charge my child friend had undertaken was completed on the night she was allowed to return to earth to determine the crisis of two lives. There is nothing now to call the bright and gracious little spirit back, for her influence will remain always. End of section 16. End of The Talking Horse and Other Stories by F. Anstey.